So to begin with, I was thinking if we could maybe just everybody could say a little piece about what they think resilience is and what that means to them.
I think Glo did a really good overall explanation of what resilience is and adaptation is. Probably they are the same kind of things, but as an architect, for me, that recently I'm working in the Global South, Kenya and other places, and also Grey Hope project, which we will go tomorrow, and local and global. So I've learned a lot myself what resilience is. Obviously, basically my understanding is that a system that won't crack, regenerate self or stand to the changing circumstances, economical, environmental, all the things of it. But as an architect, I don't think I really 100% fit, because this is a philosophy, comes from other theoretical sciences. I'm just sort of some of them to my work. So I will give other people that who knows more about resilience and a theoretical background to that. I have only practical applications of it.
Thanks. I'm not an architect, so I'll qualify that, but I am a designer. And I work in a space that is often looking at the antithesis of what we're supposed to be doing, looking at absence, not presence. So when I hear the word resilience, I'm very interested in where resilience is not happening. What is non-resilience? What is a lack of resilience? What does that look like? I find the term difficult because it implies that it's an opportunity to stress test, to come up against stress, to come up against challenges or circumstances where we might be pressed to a breaking point, and yet we don't. We find ways to survive. But my question would then be, why are we imposing these stresses on ourselves? Why are we coming to this point where resilience is required, as opposed to other certain kinds of concepts like harmony or balance or what other choice of term we use? I think resilience is a very interesting term, but I think it also has connotations that it sets off to the individual, that it's their responsibility. It almost taps into a thrive and survive or don't survive. And if you can't keep up, well, that's just too bad for you. That doesn't seem to fit within a just transition to me. So I'd like to question why we use the term resilience in the first place.
Hi, I've spent a lot of time looking at thermal comfort and so on. And this last few years, I've been dealing with comfort at the extremes. So I've been working in Antarctica. I've been working in the deserts of the Middle East and Western Australia, Aboriginal communities, stuff like that. Resilience is quite simple. It's what comes before a system when it breaks. And I think you're alluding to the stress tests of metals, right? You have a metal that you can put more stress on and it will bend. Try and adapt. You know, that's your exposure to risk. And that's your ability, your vulnerability, your ability to cope. I'm talking about now, I'm just looking at when systems break. And I think a resilient building is one you don't die in. I think it's a resilient building is one in which the well-being of the people in it aren't destroyed, where they can afford to be warm enough or cold enough or cool enough, and they don't die. And I'm looking at modern building landscape in which they're designing buildings that you die in. You overheat. You get too cold because, and then the building regulations and the government are trying to bloody kill you, aren't they? I mean, leaving people in rural housing in the middle of Scotland when, you know, Scottish Electric tells you you're going to have 72 power outages a year, and then they say you can't have a wood burner. I mean, that will result in deaths. I mean, you've got to, I mean, they've changed their mind now, but who's on our side? And then we hear talk about resilient landscapes, and it's all like pandering to developers who get more and more buildings on the floodplains. I mean, David Crichton, some of you might have known him, and I wrote that book on adapting buildings and cities for landscapes. We know that urban SUDs don't work. Yeah. The puddles get full, the dams get full. I mean, to do in the future. And well, I mean, you know, improve flooding on, and you just planes. I mean, the whole system is geared, and we saw this in the Grenfell report, to pander to the government and their friends in power, the developers, the industries, and so on. So resilience is quite simple, I think. It's just acting for the people, with the people, and to make sure that they live decent lives with a rapidly changing future. I mean, you think it's bad now, wait till 5 years down the road. So that's what I think resilience is.
As someone who lives in a house that goes down to -2 and has an average humidity of 95%, yeah, it's really bad in rural Scotland. So I'm not an architect or developer either. I'm a conservationist by background. So resilience is a really important word to me. Resilience is basically survival. If you've got, I'm going to go back to plants again because it's probably the easiest example. So a native geranium species, relations of it that I know of in 1950, it was found basically ubiquitously across our verge sides. That is a common plant in lots of parts of the UK. It is on the brink of extinction up here. And so that plant has obviously not been resilient enough to survive the environment we're living in. But if you're creating spaces, you're making a new home, a new project you're working on, how long does that development building last? I don't know. I'm not an architect. But you plant that plant there, in 1,000 years' time, its children, its children's children may well still be there. The green infrastructure you're putting in is potentially a far more long-lasting legacy in terms of the work and the impact you're having on a far larger plethora of life than the human one. And don't get me wrong, the human aspect is very, very important. That's not what I'm saying. But our ability to connect and ensure the survival of the life we are integrating into these projects is for me that aspect of resilience where you are ensuring that there is resilience for survival for the future. Yeah, that's it really. Thank you.
Yep, thanks. Yeah, I too have an issue with the word resilience. I think it's so multifaceted, it's very difficult to define. And I've heard the expression once or twice this morning, and we hear it constantly. What will the future look like? What does good look like? And to me, that's just, yeah, we're standing back. The question should be, what does the future feel like? What does good feel like? Putting ourselves in that situation. And I'm a great advocate of salutogenesis, which is, you know, focusing on good health and maintaining good health rather than look at the bad health issues. And key to that salutogenesis is meaningfulness. And that's, I think, probably a better word than resilience. And, yeah, how do we create meaningful lives for the people who live, work, play, or learn within our buildings? And how do we create that meaningful-less lives within society through planning, etc.? I mentioned Living Building Challenge earlier, and if you look at their definition of resilience, or the way they start to approach resilience, is about being culturally rich, ecologically sound, and socially just. And they're all really nice words, but how do we get there? And we're not going to really get there. And so we start thinking, okay, what does good feel like? What does that feel like to be culturally rich? What does it feel like? And we need to put our emotions, etc., into where we're going with these. Yep.
If you want to raise your voice.
Oh, yeah, so good. I'm going to disagree with most of the panel. I quite like the word resilience. I see it as the ability to change with whatever situation comes, but in a way that you continue to live, not just survive. You know, with something like a usnic lichen, the fluffy ones you see in the treetops, they have this amazing elastic core to them, where the fungal threads have like lined up to make a stretchy band, so that when you get these really strong winds that we have in Scotland, they stretch out and then spring back and stretch out and spring back, and they're fine. Nothing happened to it. It's how they've learned to adapt and still live beautifully, not just survive. And people have this ability to do that. Communities have this ability to do that. Our nature-based solutions that we're building, because we're looking at rebuilding a healthy ecosystem, not just a path from A to B in a straight arrow, but a living system that can adapt. That's a beautiful thing. I like resilience, but I think we need to flip how we're approaching that for those that are causing people to need to rely on their ability to be resilient. So because someone can stand up and take a punch, that's an excellent thing about that person, but it doesn't give the one who is attacking carte blanche to punch. So it should not, the baseline shouldn't be, did my employee leave? The baseline shouldn't be, did the citizen survive? It should be thriving citizens, happy employees. We shouldn't have to use our resilience on a day-to-day basis, and not praising people for being resilient, but removing, and that's the same for our ecosystem as well, not keep pushing to the breaking point.
I feel like you're saying resilitive, well, and you're right, it is negative. Yeah, but I look at knowing that we can do something, and that we are trying to do something is nice as well, and hopeful. So Maeve, would you like to kind of sum up what your ideas about resilience were?
Great, thank you. Yes, I guess my insurance background will come through here, but I would look at resilience through the lens of risk, with risk being a function of the hazard and your exposure to that hazard and your vulnerability, which, you know, we've heard those terms already. But if we consider that the physical hazard of climate change is already baked in, then resilience for me, it can lessen your exposure and your vulnerability to any climate events. And resilience, of course, can be viewed as a function of adaptation measures. So your resilience increases with any adaptation measures taken. I think Glo made that point earlier. So resilience for me means the ability to bounce back or recover quickly from a significant climate event. For example, because there's an effective support network in place, securing community well-being and a stable society. Or similarly, you know, having in place protective measures, whether physical or financial, that lessen the impact of a climate event in the first place. I think it recognizes the interconnectivity of environmental challenges, such as, you know, climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution, that collectively impact the planet's health as well as human health. And, you know, referring back to my presentation, we can use nature as a tool to increase resilience in a way that is also beneficial for nature. So by protecting and restoring nature and biodiversity, we can enhance the ecosystems and our resilience to adverse climate events. I think for me also, resilience is a key pillar for peace of mind and confidence in the ability to withstand unforeseen climate events, which in turn, of course, influences emotional and overall well-being.
Yes, I think, I suppose what I find refreshing about working on the Eden project in Dundee is the fact that we look for more positive ways to step beyond resilience and go and look at sort of restorative and regenerative solutions, which are not just about places, making places for people or making buildings or regenerating landscapes, but really making a big transformation for all the communities around and the city as a whole. It's a springboard for much wider and sort of holistic change. And I mean, nothing gets more sort of explicit than taking a former industrial site and thinking we must go beyond resilience here and make a place of delight, and completely transform it so that it's a place for both nature and sort of systems which serve both nature and people together, almost as one system. And so I suppose it's just, I find it helpful to have a tangible example of where we're trying to make design decisions which they will give you a fallback position, which is resilient, I suppose, but they're actually much more about people thriving and growing. So I think I'm looking forward to sharing a little bit more about that project tomorrow. But I suppose it's very practical solutions that we've been looking for, and very human solutions as well.
I'm interested in what you're saying about practical solutions, because there's been lots of different concepts and ideas shared this morning. And sometimes I find it a bit overwhelming to think, well, how can I take that? What can I do with communities? Even what can I do on a personal level? How would you bring that to communities, or what can we learn? What can we do ourselves? Yeah.
Maeve, something you said really got me, because David Crichton and I wrote that book on adaptation, and he was the great flooding guru for the insurance industry, and he devised the triangle, you know, risk, carrot, stuff like that. But you said we ought to bounce back. No, I think that's completely wrong. We have to bounce forward. We can't bounce back to a failing system. So we need to bounce forward to a new, we have to actually, things are happening so fast, we need to evolve new systems. And when you say, how can we do it? All this research done on historic data and so on. I mean, I think the only way we can really do it is using something like backcasting. Instead of forecasting what it's going to be like, is to get people together in rooms and say, look, it is now 2010, or sorry, it's 2030, 2040, and say, what do you want in the future? And you then get the communities to decide what they want for themselves. And once it'll be very different from what's forecast as good. So once you've done a good backcasting, then you can get communities to say, well, we want to get there now, not there. So these are the steps we have to take. So I think bouncing forwards and backcasting might work.
Yeah, sorry, you mentioned backcasting, because Live and Build and Challenge is based on backcasting, asking that question, you know, what will the future feel like, what will the future look like, and then how do we get there? And then, like other standards, it doesn't give you a prescription of ABC to get there. It brings the experience of the team and the innovations of the team, and I'd include nature in that as well, but it brings all those threads together to get us to the future. And I agree, it's not about bouncing back, it's about bouncing forward and feeding forward, etc., into new projects and new generations. So I think when you look at resilience in that way, the way we adapt, and probably adaptation is better than resilience, far better. But then, for examples, there are pockets of examples around the UK, or around the world. You know, you think about the wonderful communities in Totnes and Lewis and Findhorn, etc., etc. Somehow they've done it. They sort of started moving forward in a more resilient way than other communities can do. And as chair of a local community environmental group, it's very difficult to bring people that forward. You have to sort of get them to think about, okay, what does that future look like? How do we imagine that future? What do we really want? And getting the community in a room, in a workshop, is a brilliant way of doing that. Not with post-it notes, which you leave, you know, anonymously, but have the conversation, tell the stories. So that makes it much more powerful. And then people go away and start their little projects, little cells start. They might plant a Maiwaki forest somewhere, or they might do some guerrilla gardening, but slowly it starts building. So yeah, thanks for mentioning the backcasting, it's so important.
No, I completely agree. I think I mean, a lot of I'm quite negative today. I'm sorry, it's not deliberate, but you know, give the message that all the work that we do as conservationists is about hope. Oh, I wouldn't do the job if we didn't. We have to instill people with the feeling that they can do something better. You know, you're asking, what can I do? Plant a couple of trees, leaving some of the lawns, you know, a bit longer. Very small things, but it starts, as you were saying, building up that connection and starting to get back out there. It's about giving people a feeling they can do something about it. You know, can you fix climate change in your own? I mean, I hope so, but no, most likely. Can you fix biodiversity crisis in your own? No, but you can get more butterflies in your area. You can start to impact your local climate impact. You could start to do things within that. And it's just about conversation. It's about sitting down and actually getting on the ground and talking to people about the land and about what they can do, and getting them excited about that enough to make it happen. Yeah, I've gone on a tangent, but there you go.
I feel like that's, you know, we've all known that for a while, and things are getting more serious. But why is it that people aren't listening? Because you were saying that before in your talk that things aren't moving fast enough. Well, some people were saying that. Why isn't it that people are listening, and what kind of obstacles does everybody come up against, and how do you get people to listen? Okay.
Sure. I mean, as I got the mic on as well. I have to get sick of my voice, probably. Oh.
I think to some extent, action is really important, as you've described, getting people to do things, having a sense of agency. But getting back to the notion of what does the future feel like? What does it sound like? What does it taste like? What does it look like? Those are very difficult things, in part because we're projecting something into a space that we don't quite know. My work forms a space of trying to bring the future forward, because I don't see the future as a place. I don't see it as a time. I see it as just a reconfiguration of the present. It's just something that's not now. It may be then, it may be the past, but it's just a reconfiguration. But we have, as designers, the opportunity to reconfigure things. I can appreciate that architecture is a bit difficult to reconfigure in space and time, because it's a monument kind of physical construction. But we can build spaces that we can perform, that we can say, is this the future that you want? Is this the future that you like? And to some extent, that notion of experience creates a sense of, oh yes, but now I can share that experience. I can start to tell stories about the future that I want. I can start to have those narratives shift, because I think a lot of what we're coming up against is this notion of what we think we should be doing and what we think we want to be doing. We want to have a future for our kids and our children that is better than the future or the present that we have. We want to make the world a better place, but all the tools and all the stories and all of the kind of scenarios that we've been given are counterintuitive to some of the futures that we really want. I think we have it within our gift and our capacity as designers, whether you're an architect or a botanist or whatever kind of design you're doing, to reframe that narrative about what the future can and could be. Not to rationalize it or dictate it, but to let people touch it, let people feel it, let people experience it so they can walk away and go, yeah, that's what I want.
But I mean, if we're being honest, you talk as if we matter. We really don't matter, do we? I mean, has anybody read that Grenfell report? Oh, it's just frightening. The systematic corruption through the entire system. We do not matter. I mean, the entire governance of the built environment appears to be hell-bent on promoting the interests of those in power and their friends in politics. So, I mean, I think that if we want any sort of improvement in resilience, we have to do a root and branch review of regulation and standards in the built environment and overturn it. So it's not just about what the people at the top want, it's about what we want.
I don't disagree at all, but government is a designed system and we can redesign that system.
We can't.
Oh, yeah, we can. I
How?
think, how? A, vote, that's the first one. B, be an anarchist and change the system. Break the law. Why are you afraid to break the law? Excellent. You and I are going to go break some laws together, because this is how the system changes. Adherence to the system, to say that I don't have any agency because there are people who are elite representatives or whatever, and I can't change them. We can change them. We can get them out. We can do something different. We can build community wealth participation projects. We can do community governments. We can build different boundaries and we can exclude them. It will be really, really, really hard work. But I mean, I'm not adverse to rolling up my sleeves and doing the hard work, but I don't think that it's about us and them. I think that it's about us. And if they don't care for me, then I have choices. I have tools. I can stop paying my taxes. I can become a hermit. I mean, I'm halfway there. So I disagree that there's a them that control us as an elite. And I just think that if that is the case, then we either can accept it or we can not accept it. We have a binary choice. And I choose to say I don't want to accept it.
Can I?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was just thinking about Aberdeen as a city and the other cities. And I was thinking resilience and adaptation. I think we talk a lot about resilience, but for me, adaptation is the key. Because, I mean, we already got everything. And why can't we make this city lovable to go instead of building all over the places? For example, even my university made a huge mistake. There was 10,000 students in this city center and decided to do a huge settlement out of it. So you took the blood out of the city center. They're building hundreds of new houses when we have fantastic structures that actually can be converted, like entire Union Street, 1.5 miles long animal. How can you feed that if you keep taking the blood out? So we have to really rethink what we have, value, and adapt it in the first place. So adaptation is, for me, is the resilience. So this is how we get to think in terms of the built environment.
So I'm going to go a little bit back to talking about, speed of progress, and then maybe touch on some of the things that we discussed there that are way over my pay grade. At the end of the day, climate change, we might already be past the tipping point. Don't know. I'm not a climatologist. That might be it. In which case, what's the point? I don't think it matters, to be honest. I don't think it matters. We have to do our best. We have to keep pushing as hard as we can to make the difference as rapidly as possible, so that if we are past that point, well, we can know we tried. Basically, that's all you get for future generations. If they look back at us now and say they have completely destroyed us. I mean, we talk about the burning, we were in a burning house. I have known since infancy, or very, very young age, we get taught about climate change, we get taught about biodiversity decline. I've never known a world where we haven't. Lots of people in this room, I'm sure, are in the same boat. But it doesn't matter. We're all still sitting here. We're all still making that difference. So, talk about corruption in government, in issues like that. It doesn't make a difference to me because it's not going to change what I'm doing. I'm going to just keep going anyway. So if they want to stop that, well, they can get in the way and we'll push them out the way. And if they try and, talk about breaking the law, there are instances, hypothetically, where plants have been moved from outside development sites, hypothetically, when they should have been counted and included. I shouldn't be admitting this in front of the panel, should I? Where endangered species, not in the UK, in other countries would have been destroyed and were moved. There wasn't permissions for that, but I can sleep at night. There's plenty of times when I think we can make the right call as human beings without needing to exist within that system. And if we're all screwed, well, then we're all screwed. But it doesn't matter. Yeah, sorry.
I'd like to say something.
So looking at things like, if we take it back to development and bringing in plants and greenery into an urban system, we need to go back and challenge the baseline that we're all living at, that we're all operating from. So we just had, at the beginning of September, the World Green Infrastructure Congress. And I was talking with colleagues at the Auckland Botanic Gardens in New Zealand. And they have these beautiful rain garden swales in their parking lot. So in between each row of cars, they had these rain garden swales. And they're filled with native New Zealand plants. And they're designed to take care of the flooding, but also deal with the pollution that's coming off of the tarmac. And they're really beautiful. It makes it a nice environment to be in. And we had this discussion with people from all over. And I had someone who works in individual business development and construction say to me after the fact, I didn't want to say it to the whole group, but I was wondering how many more parking spaces could you fit in there if you didn't have those swales? Probably 30 or 40. No developer is gonna want to lose those 30 or 40 parking spaces. And that's a very familiar conversation to those working on green infrastructure. And everyone kind of goes, oh yeah, but it should be, well, respectfully, construction company, those are not your spaces to lose, because we're not designing it for cars. This is not way back in industrial where, Ohio and the States, when you had the smell of tanneries and parents were telling their kids, oh, that's the smell of dinner on the table, because it meant that tannery gave jobs. That was the mindset. It should not be that anymore. You should be able to live and live well. And so it shouldn't be, well, we could have shade, we could deal with pollution, we could increase biodiversity, but we'd have to lose 30 parking spaces, and that'd be the fight. It should be the construction companies having to say, we could squeeze in 30 more spaces for you, but it's gonna be a hot pan because there will be no shade, and it's gonna be 40 degrees in the beginning of June. And it's going to increase the pollution in your stream, and you're going to have to deal with that.
What I'm saying is that the decisions are made not for us, not for the communities, not for the environment, they're made for the developers.
Yes, they absolutely are. But we, as those who are talking with developers, who are talking with places that are putting in new developments or new green spaces, should be challenging that baseline of, it's really hard to get them to change.
The bottom line is money, and they're not going to change. The only way you can do it is through regulation. Well, we should change the people who are making the regulations, that's for sure.
Yeah, can I just add a point to that? Because I know you should really bring these. You could just go back to your thought about what are the barriers to resilience and adaptation. And for me, that comes down to time. I mentioned earlier about our time being stolen. And you see people in the working in organization, architect practice, are on billable hours, just go from blocks of time, no time to think between. The planning authorities, well, they've been stripped out, they're hollowed out, so there's no planners in there, so they don't have time to look at these things. And to find that time and space like we have today to discuss this is incredibly invaluable to organizations and people to work this through.
I'd say, isn't Maeve got the solution in the insurance industry? You're already not insuring houses on floodplains. I mean, you can do that. You can not insure buildings without, covered car parks.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's essentially the core of the Naturance project that I'm working on, albeit a European-wide, but we're working closely with Flood Re in the UK as well, which is very much about, there is a solution in the interim to, reinsure those people who wouldn't otherwise be able to get insurance where they currently live. But the idea is ultimately that the overall system becomes more resilient and kind of prohibits that building on the floodplain in the first place, so that insurers don't need to step in, because they will stop stepping in. There will be a point in the future where they walk away. So yeah, I mean, the Naturance project is very much about informing policy and influencing the decision makers. You know, can we build the body of evidence to demonstrate that, you know, the green infrastructure can trump the grey infrastructure in this respect, and, you know, build sensible policies around that as well. So yeah, I mean, I used to work for Aviva, and the chief CEO of Aviva, Amanda Blanc, was, you know, she is kind of one of the voices who would be strongly advocating for, you know, proper flood planning, proper, you know, changes to building codes, etc. So yeah, I mean, in theory, nothing gets done if it doesn't get insured. So the insurance industry certainly does hold a lot of power.
We've only got a few minutes left. So Rachel, have you got any points that you'd like to make?
Well, I always find it easier to talk through projects as a practitioner, and so sort of solutions that we've got in whole. But I mean, in a way, I'm heartened by the fact that there are some projects which are championing change, and they are sort of stepping aside from regulation and saying, as the client, Eden's called a project for a reason, because it's ongoing, and they're looking for the solutions over the lifetime of a place, and happy to adapt and happy to take on new rules of ownership and working with and building sort of with communities. So I suppose they're becoming tangible, and they're not so much theory, but they are a real example of how of what the future might feel like, I suppose. and that's quite heartening. So I suppose I want just to flag a bit of hope, really, that there are pockets of change, and that's what we're going to talk about tomorrow. That's all.
Are we out of time? Okay. Well, thank you very much to everybody, and let's continue the conversation at lunch and afterwards and tomorrow. Okay, thank you.